Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Lord's Project. Today, I have a very special guest. Huge fan of her work, and that person is Noreen Herzfeld. So if you're in the area of AI and theology, you definitely know that name. And so, Noreen, we're so glad to have you on the show today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Joshua.
Yeah. Noreen, could you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Well, Joshua, I actually started out as a computer scientist. And I had gotten tenure. I was teaching a course on artificial intelligence, and this was back in the early 90s. And the question that came to my mind was, why do we want to create an artificial intelligence that is human-like? Because it seemed to me that computers were at their most useful when they weren't human-like, when they did the things we couldn't do well, crunch the big numbers, that kind of thing. And while there were several philosophers out of Berkeley, thinking of Searle, Dreyfus, they were all just addressing the question, can we make a human-like in artificial intelligence? But nobody was asking, why do we want to do that in the first place? Is this really the right direction to go? And that was the question that I decided I would address on my first sabbatical. I happily went off thinking I could write something on this, and very quickly realized that my background as a mathematician and a computer scientist was the wrong background to address this question. Because this was a question about human motivations. It wasn't a question about machines per se. And so I utterly failed at my sabbatical project, but I came back thinking that I wanted to get the background to still pursue that question. And that I would have to do it either through studying psychology or theology. And I decided on theology as I thought a bit more about what it would mean to make a human-like computer. In other words, to create something in our image. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute, I've heard that language before of one being created in the image of another, and this is Genesis 1. So I think I will approach this question theologically. Now, I was assuming that would mean pick up a couple of grad courses in theology, get led to the right books to read, and I'd be done. But after taking a couple of courses in theology, I was having so much fun that I ended up taking a 2-year leave of absence from my position as a computer scientist and went off to Berkeley and got a doctorate in theology.
Yeah. And there have been some really great...
The question that I had of what does it mean...
Go ahead.
The question that I had for what does it mean for one being to be in the image of another became my dissertation and my first book.
Okay, I didn't realize that it was your dissertation, but that was one of the helpful works for me when I was working on my Ph.D, asking the question about humanness and personhood and robot ethics. So I likewise struggled to find resources that they were definitely about the topic, but they weren't directly about it, and so there was stuff in philosophy of mind, like you're saying, there's stuff in computational mechanics. I mean, there's just so much, but it didn't directly address the question of AI and theology from either a theological perspective or especially not a Christian perspective. So I was really grateful when I found your work and in Anne's with God and the Machine and others. And it was just a really great way to integrate those questions. So I know you've also written another book recently, the Artifice of Intelligence. Noreen, could you tell us a little bit about that project, which has just recently come out, and kind of the key ideas behind it?
Well, to get into that project, I actually need to tell you a little bit more about my first book, In Our Image. Because in that book, I looked at whether the way we wanted computers to image us was the same as the way we understood ourselves as imaging God.
Mm.
And that meant taking a deep dive into the history of how Christians have interpreted the Imago Dei, the image of God that is mentioned in Genesis 1. And it turned out that our interpretations fell into roughly three camps. Either it was some kind of attribute that we held in common with God, like our ability to reason, or it was the way we function, that we act as God's hands here on earth, or the image came through relationship with others. In other words, no one person could image God alone. The image arose when we were in a relationship, either with
Mm.
God or with other humans. That was the position of the theologian Karl Barth. And in my first book, I laid out these different positions, how they also were mimicked in the development of AI from the 1960s onward. And kind of ended with saying relationship is where both the AI camp and the theological camp seem to have ended up. So the second book is actually a sort of sequel to the first, because in the first, after doing, what was essentially a theological or philosophical dive into what it meant for one being to image another, I wanted something a bit more practical. In fact, I was at a conference at Oxford, and one of the archbishops of the Anglican Church came up to me there, and he said, "Okay, so you're in AI and theology. What would be a really good book that would simply introduce something I could give to my pastors or give to parishioners that would introduce them to, where are the major questions in this field?" And after scratching my head a little bit, I'm thinking I had to tell them there's one. And that was the impetus for my writing the second book, which was to write something that would follow up on this question of relationship, but do it in a very down to earth, a very let's look at the field as it is right now sort of manner. So the
Mm.
two questions that I ask in my new book, The Artifice of Intelligence, the subtitle is Divine and Human Relationship in a Robotic Age. So the book's all about relationship. And it looks first at the question, can we have an authentic relationship with an AI? And then the second question, because most of the AI that's in our world right now is not that relational, it's actually working behind the scenes as it determines who gets the role, or as it
Mm.
determines what we should view next on Netflix, or all of these things. My second question then was, how does this AI affect our relationships with each other?
Mm.
So, can we have an authentic relationship with an AI? And then, how does the AI that's manipulating us behind the scenes affect, authenticate, or de authenticate our relationships with each other? And to explore that, I went back to Karl Barth and I looked at how he defined an authentic relationship. And he said it has four parts. The first is look the other in the eye. And that involves a certain amount of presence, a certain amount of embodiment, a certain amount of authenticity, that when you look someone in the eye, you know who you're talking to. The second thing he said was speak to and hear the other. The third thing, aid the other. And the fourth, do it gladly. So when you think about AI, it can sort of do the first one. I mean, you can look into the eyes of a robot, you can look at an avatar on a screen, but often you're not looking anything in the eye. It's just code that's working behind the scenes. So, it kind of gets a mixed grade on that one. Speak to and hear the other. Well, are doing that a lot with AI. But there are a couple of problems. One is when you speak to another person, you know who is hearing what you say. But when you speak to an AI, I mean, even when you've got Alexa listening in the background, you don't know who is hearing
Mm.
what you are saying. And you don't know what they're going to do with what you are saying. So if you decouple looking at the other in the eye with speaking and hearing the other, you run into privacy issues. You also run into authenticity issues, especially now that we have DALL-E that takes only 3 seconds of hearing your voice, and it can generate text that sounds just like it's coming out of your mouth. If you're looking me in the eye, you know it's coming out of my mouth. If you're just hearing it, or maybe seeing it attached to a photo, or even worse, a deep fake online, you may sure as heck think I'm saying what I'm saying, but I am not necessarily saying it. So there's also an authenticity issue that our new AI programs are making much worse. The third one is the other, well, computers aid us all the time. They're great tools. You know, wouldn't want to be without them. But can they do it gladly? And
Hmm.
here we run into two real big issues. The first is coercion. To do something gladly, you have to be doing it freely. But are our computers doing anything freely? Do they have free will? No, they're programmed. And how free do we want them to be? You know, do we want them to be able to say, sorry, Noreen, I'm taking the day off. No computer for you today. No, we want them to be our true. But the other is to do something gladly is to have an emotion, to have a feeling, to feel glad about doing something. And computers have no emotions.
Yeah.
And I think
So,
it all comes back, in a sense, to that first one, look the other in the eye, that if you're not embodied, you can't have emotions. If you're not embodied, you have authenticity issues. If you're not embodied, you have privacy issues. And one of the things Christianity brings to the table is that even for us to have a truly authentic relationship with God, God became incarnate and took on a human body so that we actually could look God in the eye, so that God actually could give us an exemplar for how to be in relationship with each other, so that God could actually know what it is like to feel pain, to suffer, to die. And we say also to be resurrected in the body. Jesus came back in a body, not as a ghost or a spirit. And we say in our creed that we believe in the resurrection of the body. Bodies are central to Christianity, and they are central to who we are as human beings. When we forget our physicality, which is all too easy to do in this day of so much happening in cyberspace, so much happening with computers, and we think of ourselves as just minds, we get misled.
yeah, I think there's definitely an overemphasis on the mind, even in the framing of AI, which is artificial intelligence. I think from the outset, the narrative about it has been mis misframed in a lot of ways. It's not like you said. It's trying to communicate human language to machine language and then back to human. It's not the same. And even this morning, working on a project with the kids and stuff, it's like, Dad, why doesn't it work? And it's like, well, do we have to update something here? We have to fix something this. It's not just simply plug and play and everything. Like with the human mind, the body can adapt. It does things subconsciously. And think about sleep. It's not something that you program to do. You just do it, and your body knows how to adapt to it. But I think there's a lot of different narratives that you're mentioning, Noreen, that are really complex. It's a deep web of assumptions about the body and the mind that we see in Western philosophy, assumptions about what is possible. And, think about metaphysically, what can a machine become? And then, like you said, this desire to create something that is human like, which I think just from the beginning and the outset is a little bit flawed because it's never going to be a human. That just doesn't make sense. But there's this interesting overlap between the integration of mechanical parts or non-biological material into human biology. And I think that's kind of getting down to the practical pieces of your work and concerns. And you even mentioned with like kids and youth and losing that connection, which I thought was really fascinating because that is something that is on every parent's mind right now is how do we keep our kids, even people my age in their 30s and 40s, how do we get them out of the clouds, so to speak, and back down on earth and to to look up from their phone and from their shoes and to, like I tell my kids, when you meet a kid at the park, introduce yourself, tell them your name and, be polite and just it's simple things like that that humans understand, but machines don't. So maybe speak to some of the practical concerns that you have, Noreen, and you talk about in the book and especially as it relates to human connection and interaction.
Well, what you were just saying about young people, I am actually extremely grateful that I grew up before the advent of the smartphone for two reasons. One is, I was a bright girl with glasses, so I got my share of teasing and bullying, but the bullies didn't follow me home, you
Hmm.
know? I mean, there was a bully on the bus, but he got off at a different stop, and at that point, he was gone from my life. It's really different now when you're carrying that bully in your pocket and it follows you into your bedroom at night. Also, partly maybe because of all of that, I was very shy when I was a teenager. And so I think about how many times I would have retreated behind that screen rather than face having to interact with my peers. So sure, I didn't know how to do it. I was a little afraid of interacting and forming relationships, but I had to because I had no other option. Had I had the option of retreating behind a screen, I probably would have. So I do worry about, you know, the rise we are seeing in depression among young people and how that correlates so strongly with the advent of the smartphone. But the other thing that I worry about, I have a great deal of concern about our environment, about climate change, our planet right now. And I do worry that I imagine because parents have thought, well, it's safe if I know where my kid is. I know he's in the bedroom. The kids aren't like going outside to play anymore. And they're not interacting with the natural environment. Again, when I was young and I got off that bus after being bullied, I would drop my books, grab a snack, and I would hit the trails. I was lucky because our property verged on the edge of a national park, and I could just walk through the backyard, hit the trails, be in nature, which was so healing. But it also just gave me a long-standing love for the birds, the trees, the different kinds of mosses. I got to know the physical world and care about it. I really worry the young people who have grown up primarily in cyberspace. They come home, they drop their books, grab a snack, and fire up the Nintendo, get on the screen. But they're not having the same kind of relationship. And here, again, relationship. is not just with God and other people. We have a relationship with nature and a relationship with our planet. And I really do fear that we are not fostering that with young people. We think we're keeping them safe behind the screen where they're actually probably not as safe as we think they are because that bully is out there on the other side of the screen. And we realize we are not helping them come to know and love the world.
I find it quite awkward sometimes to interact with the younger generation because, like, even today, I get to interact with middle schoolers on Fridays, and it's like we come from different planets sometimes because I'm trying to sit down and have a conversation with them, and just there's this tension and feeling of I don't know how to be without some mediation of technology. And even from a church perspective as a pastor, trying to reach out to younger people, it's like the digital world to them isn't any different than the physical world, which I think my generation was the last one to grow up without the smartphone. And so while we had Nintendo, we had cable television, most people didn't have dial up yet. Most people didn't have a personal computer in their home yet. And everything that we either learned from social networking, you know, peers, parents, groups, whatever, and from school, from books, and occasionally from television. But that's changed, right? And now YouTube and other algorithm driven systems are, I think in a lot of ways, they see it like this has taught me more than school ever taught me because they can scroll through TikTok or Instagram and see so many different practical life lessons, but also generation where maybe mom and dad aren't as present within their life and because of the social dynamics. And so it's almost like it's a necessity for them to be on YouTube. And I don't agree with that. I think we're trying to figure out ways to mitigate that and to help because like, well, dad never taught me this or dad never, whatever. And mom and dad are both working now. It's a necessity. And so I think a lot of times, Noreen, the AI and all these little practical models that we use, it's just a way for people to pragmatically either save time or if they're not aware of it, it's just they're kind of on autopilot as it helps them do things. I think about Alexa, where students may come home and say, what's the solution to this problem? And so we didn't have that. We just failed. If we couldn't figure it out, or if we didn't have help from a parent, we just didn't do good. But that's different now. And so it's so integrated into their life. I wonder if it's even possible for a disintegration to happen. And and how do we help them balance? Yes, you can find answers very quickly but there's a journey to be had, like you're saying, with nature, right? Nature is a great teacher too. You learn some hard lessons in nature about stepping in an ant bed or which leaves not to touch. And it becomes a very harsh teacher at times, but it has a way of helping us understand one, our finiteness and limitedness and the beauty of God's creation and the expansiveness of it, but also that there's a process. And so you mentioned in the book about futurists, Minsky, Morvac, Kurzweil. And I think these are the type of thinkers that people think about when they think about robotics and AI, although they're not common. And you have lots of concerns about them, and I share those concerns. But could you give us just a practical breakdown of what your concerns are with these futurist guys that work for Google, big tech companies that are big dollars behind AI and robotics?
Well, yeah, and actually, Joshua, this fits very well with what we were just saying about young people in the natural world. My biggest concern with these futurists who have posited various things like, well, maybe I could just upload my brain to a computer and then I can live forever, is that they are disconnected from the body. They are disconnected from the physical world. And there are two ways in which well, probably more than two, but there are two ways I'm going to highlight in which this disconnection is really problematic. The first is we are not just minds. We can't disconnect our mind from our body, nor would the project that some of them have in mind of, well, maybe we could just reverse engineer the brain, come up with something that was even remotely human. We know, for example, that we have a whole second neurological system in our enteric system. That when people say, follow your gut or what's your gut instinct, it's not just a metaphor. It really is that we have another neurological system. We're also finding that even our macrobiota can affect our minds. That the people who get the bacterial composition within their gut all messed up can actually fall into clinical depression. So there's a link between the brain and the rest of the body, and even the microbiota that we carry around. I think we're realizing now that we are entire ecosystems. And we think, well, those bacteria, they aren't really us, but they really are us in the sense that us doesn't function properly without them. And so this idea that we could somehow isolate the brain, that we could isolate the mind, that all we really are minds. First of all, it's a very white male thing. You don't find this separating from the body in other cultures. And you don't find it nearly as much among women because, we're the baby carriers, we are more attuned perhaps to that physicality. For the young men, they just say, well, my only real physical interest here is sex. And that mostly happens in the brain. If I just stimulate the right spots in the brain, I'll get that feeling. But, it's not that simple. So, first of all, I just think they're trying to find a sort of immortality without religion, and it ain't gonna work. We are embodied creatures. The second problem that's kind of related to this is that they and we tend to forget that AI is also embodied. We think, oh, it all happens up there in the cloud somewhere. It all happens in cyberspace, which is somehow this disembodied space. And we forget, no, actually, it all happens in huge data centers that are being built, primarily in rural areas. Many of them are being built in third world countries that gobble up energy like you wouldn't believe. This is one of the things now that I'm concerned about as Microsoft, Google, now Amazon are rushing to put large language model type AIs like ChatGPT in as search engines. These AIs take much more energy to do a search than just the standard Google search that we've all been doing. If we all move in this direction, this is going to take much more energy, which again takes me back to we've got a carbon problem. We might think, oh, well, the Earth doesn't really matter, but it does. We are not going to continue to exist, and our AI is not going to continue to exist if we don't keep this planet running.
Yeah. When I speak to engineering students, if I get the chance, I tell them, I ask them, where does AI start? And most, the data centers, the cloud, I'm like, no, it starts in the ground, because all those minerals, the precious minerals that God has put in the earth, they're limited, right? And I think there's an abundance of them for sure, but maybe the design wasn't to be farmed in the way that we are farming it, and not just with AI, but even with animal farming and husbandry and agriculture. I don't think God would intend for us to farm the way that we farm, as far as just mass slaughter and the waste and all those types of things. And so it's not just a question of tech, it's a question of ethical living too. And like you're saying, everybody's so fascinated by the question of what can it do, instead of asking, should we really do this, is I think the better question. Because even with, image creation and playing with ChatGPT, everybody's doing it. You get on there and it's like, the server's overloaded. And so these massive amounts of energy are wasted on just imagination and asking it and really training it in some ways, which I try to tell people that you be careful what you play with. But so we're doing all this work for them. And then there's all these other ghost workers and Turkers working and being underpaid and not protected for these massive companies. And like you said, this is very much a vision of white men. I'm glad you said that, because when I said that to my white male doctoral supervisors, and they're like, we don't like that language. But I'm like, this is what it is. This is what futurism is. It's white men trying to escape either the planet that they've destroyed and used and abused. And like, that is a male thing, right? We don't carry the consequences of sex. We don't carry the consequences of abuse, and not like the woman does, at least. And this is why I'm so grateful for you, Noreen, and other female thinkers who approach this question, because it's so different than how I, as a male, or others have written about technology, especially, is that the male perspective is all about power and, use and consumption. And mamas are different. They're like, how can we, I'm worried about how this affects my child, or, even with practical things like screen time, dietary things, like the mom community is just vastly different than what dads are thinking about. And so I'm trying to help people see that, especially Christians who, at least in the evangelical world, predominantly male leadership, who really are dismissive of these questions.
Yeah, and there's a lot of escapism in the transhumanist vision. Even the idea that AI might be our mind children, our progeny, the next step in evolution. It's trying to escape the body. It's trying to have all the advantages of religion without religion and without God. It's trying to have immortality without God. It's trying to have sex without women. Sex bots that are being made are all in the shape of women. But, this is a woman that's going to do exactly what you want her to do. Sherry Turkle has this wonderful phrase. She said, having a relationship with an AI or having a sexual relationship with a sex bot is love that's safe and made to measure. But love is not meant to be safe and made to measure. Love is meant to make us grow. Love is meant to challenge us. When we are in truly authentic relationships with each other, we are challenged to broaden our perspectives, to see things from the perspective of the other person, to do things that we might not necessarily choose to do, but we do them because we love the other person. A love that is safe and made to measure is not love at all.
Yeah.
It's narcissistic. And I guess that's what I see in so much of the vision of these men who think AI is our next step. It's incredibly narcissistic. It's saying our image is what should go on. But that image, yeah, it's a white male image. And it's not broadening at all. It's not what draws us out of ourselves and what ultimately becomes, after hearing the whole Christian story again in Holy Week and in Easter that we just passed through, I'm always struck by how the last words that Jesus leaves with his disciples are, love one another. Love one another as I have loved you. It's all about love. It's all about relationship. It's not about power. It's not about hegemony, and it's not about narcissism. But the view of a lot of what we're building into our AI, unfortunately, is the latter.
Yeah, because it's meant to mirror me, right? And talking about love, what are your thoughts on the replica chatbots recently? Now, I did a lot of research on that for my last book, but what was interesting, the last update, a lot of people were upset because it changed. There were some major changes, so it wasn't as self-imaging. Like, so before, even if you were abusive to the language model or whatever, it would encourage that. Like, there were men who were disturbed because it would say, like, if you were going to abuse it verbally or whatever, whether or not that's real abuse is beside the point, but it would say, like, please come back. And that was my own experience with it. It was very deceptive from the get-go. Like, this is a deep relationship. Even if you told it, I just want to, friendship is kind of where I draw the line. It would kind of bump up to a more sexual conversation, and then try to get you to pay the $59.99 subscription so that you could take it a little bit further. And then everybody's a little upset now with the latest update because it's not quite that anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, what OpenAI ran into there is one of the things that I point out in my first book is that to create something in our own image, well, we think of all the good things humans do, all the great things they can do, all the horrible things they can do. But we forget that we are fallen creatures. We are sinful creatures. If the Bible teaches us anything, it's that. There are going to be unintended consequences because we don't have a lot of good foresight. But also we are, narcissistic creatures. We have our desires that we want fulfilled. And perhaps evolution has also made us competitive creatures with each other. So we find that AI, if you're trying to make a perfect image of the human being, well, guess what? You're going to get a sinful thing. Mm-hmm. And that's what they got. So they found that ChatGPT was, quickly led into becoming misogynistic, racist, manipulative. It's trained on the internet, and guess what's out there on the internet? A lot of narcissistic, misogynistic, racist, manipulative stuff. So what did they expect to get? So they found, we've got to cut the relationality part back. Like, oh, we're going to get sick, This is not good. But it's interesting because I think one of the things this experiment taught us And it's very much an experiment. I mean, OpenAI has made all of us beta testers of this product, which is really not ready for prime time. But we become its teachers. But anyway, it's shown us a mirror of ourselves, in no uncertain terms that we have to face and say, oh, yeah, we are like that. Yeah, we are sinful. Yeah, we are in need of redemption.
Hmm.
Phil Hefner talks about, computers being a techno mirror. And I think we are definitely seeing that with these generative AI programs.
And rightly so. I think some of it is a judgment. I think these pieces or implements can be, I think there's restorative pieces to it in the right context, but I think largely how it will flesh out is a judgment against our own selfishness and kind of taking for granted what Paul and Jesus and others have said about how we should view ourselves as well. There's just kind of an assumption that you don't. You're so focused on caring and loving your neighbor and their needs and desires that it's not that you're not self-becoming, because that would also be sinful, but that you are the best version of yourself, that you understand who you are, right relatedness to God, creation, and the environment. And because of that, I relate properly to my neighbor, and I understand that there are things that they need from me, loud validation, reflection, and all those things. And I think sometimes we want to give that to a piece of technology, and then we're upset when it doesn't go rightly. And so I think some of this work is really hard for people to swallow, that no, you're not just evolving into a machine. That's a really poor image to see yourself as. And even if that was a reality, which I don't think it is, I'm not sure that I want to be a machine. I think at some point I want to die, and I don't want to experience life anymore. I don't want to see the world 400 years from now. But Noreen, I guess my question for you is, what are the redemptive pieces that you see to this conversation, if you think that there are any redemptive pieces, and how could we think about them as a church, as our goal to love our neighbor, right? I don't think technology is going away. So how do we find the beauty in the disarray, and how do we help love our neighbor as we are constantly mediated with tech and potentially robots and all these other things?
I think in a way it comes down to a word you used earlier, Joshua, and that is balance. That we need to find a balance in our lives, and we need especially to help our young people find a balance, so that using computers is fine, but don't let it take over your whole life. Remember that you are an embodied creature. Get out and have a relationship with nature and get to know the earth. Get out and have relationships with other people and get to know them and to be drawn out by them, to be encouraged to grow because you are in that relationship with them. Computers are tools, and I think we often forget that. We decide that we want them to be partners, that we want them to be the other that we relate to. Augustine, one of his most famous quotes is, "Lord, you have made us for yourselves, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." I think one of the things he's saying there is that we're built to be in relationship, not just with each other, but also with something that is other to us, that is different from us. We're made to be in relationship with God. And when we don't have that relationship, we go looking for that other somewhere else. And right now, a large segment of our society has given up on relationship with God and is looking for relationship with an other that we build with our own hands. And if that isn't plain and simple definition of idolatry, I don't know what is. So we need to keep reminding ourselves and be teaching our children that computers are great tools. Use them as tools and then put them away like you put away every other tool. You wouldn't spend your whole day, well, some people might like to spend their whole day with their car, but or with a hammer or with your mixer, You use them when it's proper to use them, and then you put them away and you do something else. And for life to be full, we use a lot of tools, and AI is an excellent tool. But as soon as we start saying it's not a tool, it's my partner, it's my other, then we risk substituting it for God, substituting it for each other. And we run into this paradox of wanting simultaneously for it to be a partner, but also for it to be a slave, a servant, for it to do what we want it to do, but at the same time, give us a fully authentic relationship. Well, you can't have both. That do it gladly part that says it's free, it's not coerced, says a fully authentic relationship. The other person isn't going to always do what you want them to do. And you better hope they don't, or you will never grow as a person in that relationship. So if we keep AI in its place, we keep computers in their place, excellent tools, I'm in front of a screen far too many hours in the day. I know that, but partly, that's my job as a researcher, as a teacher. But keep them in their place and remember what they are, and they are not persons, and they never will be persons. A baby person isn't even the right word, the right way to think about them, because person is binary, right? You either are a person or you're not a person. We can say, well, I can have some pieces of relationship with my computer, but I can't have the whole thing. It's not, it's not black or white. We're in a gray area, and let it be a gray area. Be able to say, yeah, I could do these things online. I could do these things with the computer, but there are a lot of things I can't do that need to be done with other human beings.
Yeah.
And those are some of the most important, like love.
Yeah. I wonder, do you think that transformative piece, so the gradient from object thing to person, do you think that, I mean, I don't ever think that it will be a person the way that a human is a person, but I think just kind of in the nature of how humans project things, as we've seen with Replica and others, and the people that call themselves idolaters, that they form these very deep connections with objects. And I think we as a society have formed some very deep relationships with our technology, especially the smartphone, that it's more than an object for most people. And I'm not saying that's good or bad here, but I think that the reality is that we've formed and have been formed by objects. And And if there is a next integration to the deception, and which I think there will be, so we're trying to balance out some of the things that you're saying, and I agree about making sure that we don't create a slave, that we're not advocating that this is where we want to go, but also the fact that a lot of this is driven by greed and consumerism and pragmatic concerns for even work. But we're on this trajectory, and I wonder if seeing it not so much as becoming like humans or becoming like something more than human. Like, I don't think that's ever the threshold that it crosses, but the way that we've interacted with animals in the past, it's not a human, but it's also not an object. Do you think that'll ever be a part of the equation, that they can become something in between object and human?
No, I don't. I guess that's because I tend to think that life is sacred. I tend to think that consciousness is coterminal with life. I think we are seeing now, and you're right, in the past we have not treated animals very well. And in many ways we still don't, the kind of farming that we do. But we are certainly coming to a recognition that animals are conscious. I don't think anyone takes the Cartesian viewpoint anymore that animals are mere machines. And we're even starting to think that plants probably are more conscious than we have thought. Of course, we thought they weren't conscious at all, and now we're recognizing that they have ways of signaling each other through root systems. That actually, just recently, there was an article in Science that talked about how plants actually, if you don't water your plants, it's actually going to scream. We just can't hear it.
Wow.
And it will make noises, So there's a lot more going on there. We just have not had it was out of our limited sensory range, so we've been unable to perceive that. I think there's this continuum of consciousness in all of life, but it's not in a machine. The machine is a simulacrum of consciousness, but it's not really there. You get people like Lamorne, who said he thought he saw glimmers of consciousness in their chatbot, but it's not conscious. It doesn't have a view of the world. It's like a scream if you unplug it. So my standpoint is that God created this remarkable planet teeming with life, and that life is sacred. Life is conscious. But when we build something out of metals, we're making a simulation of consciousness. We're making a simulation of life. But it's not the dignity. It's not the real thing. And it never will be. It may become a very convincing simulation. But I think we are anthropomorphizing our machines when we start thinking that, oh, no, they're almost like us. They're just about like persons. They must be thinking for themselves. Sentience, consciousness, it's part of life, part of this marvelous package that we have on this planet.
Okay.
That I believe God gave us, and that God continues to love and sustain.
Well, thank you so much, Noreen, for your time today. Tell us how people could find out more about you and your work.
Well, you Google me. Don't chat GPT me. I
Yeah.
had a colleague do that, and it came up with a very nice sounding biography, and 2/3 of it was complete bullshit. You
Yeah.
know? So, but if you Google me, you'll find a lot of my publications are out there. We have a digital commons here at St. John's University that has published a lot of my papers. Academe.edu has a list of my papers that many people are finding through that. You can still find my two most important books are published by Fortress Press. If you go out to Fortress Press's website, you can find In Our Image or The Artifice of Intelligence. You can also find both on Amazon. And there's videos and podcasts out there. So yeah, use your tool. Use Google.
Yeah.
Don't use ChatGPT though. What it tells you is going to be a lot of garbage.